Hey folks, I have this glass container. It came from the Hobby Lobby. In case you're interested in it, it's item number 133306. I put some craft foam using circle punches to have padding, and I'm going to plant a few sundews into this container. And I've had these for a while and kept them alive, but not planted. Here I have a Drosera natalensis, a Drosera roseana, and here I have both Drosera madagascariensis along with a mystery species of Drosera spatulata, even though Drosera spatulata is considered the species, so it's more of an interesting variety, but it does look a little different than a typical spatulata, so it will be interesting to see how these turn out. So I have a container over here of dry peat moss. So using some cup from cough syrup, I am just using that as a cup to pour in here because I realize this does a really good job, because I can get a lot bigger scoop from here than a spoon, and this container is large enough to reach down in there, and then I can dump it and not have to worry about spilling it like I could with a spoon. So it's actually working out really, really well. Now, one thing to note about the really dry peat moss is that it needs to get a little wet before it starts readily wicking up any water. Same thing with soil. If you have a pot that's really, really dry and you water the plant and it goes straight into the saucer and you stop watering, and then it dries out pretty fast, but if the soil is already moist when you water, it will grab onto more water before getting down to the saucer. Now, this terrarium doesn't have a lid. It's an open terrarium that I'm going to be placing them in. So I'm actually going to add a little extra peat moss and make it a little deeper than I typically do when I make these things. You know, I don't do all these multiple layers with false bottoms and stuff because I just grow them in pure peat, and sundews don't mind it to be pretty wet. And by making this a little deeper than having it very little soil, I can ensure that it will retain moisture for longer durations between watering. So if I am worried, because sundews love the water, you don't want them fully waterlogged, but you also want them to be essentially wet constantly. You don't want them to dry out because these are very susceptible to dying if left to dry out. Then you basically need to give it a little more media. So, can't even close this lid, can I? As you look, I have plenty of media there to make it really thick. I'm trying not to flip it over so I don't get the edge of the container all wet. But let me go get some distilled water. And unfortunately, I don't have a wash bottle on me with distilled water, so I'm just going to have to pour carefully just pour carefully and let it soak. And as it soaks, I'll pour a little more, because if I just pour too much, it will get to the sides and then it will look ugly. But using the wash bottle, you just pour down the side and wash down any excess, and that helps. So I'm going to pour a little more, and a little more, and just let it sit and soak. I'm not going to pour much more than that for now, because you need to let it soak before you do, or else you'd end up over watering it and it will be overly saturated. Now, the Drosera roseana, I have not yet looked at it. You know, my friend Greg, oh, wow, it's such a tiny variety. The roseana is a pygmy sundew, and I see that one of them There died, but that one's alive. That's the problem. You know, you find really good plants and you get them before you have the means to pot them, and you can risk killing them. But this cup is going to be very useful because it's not only a cheap disposable measuring cup, it's also going to help me with watering the container. So let's see. Sometimes I wonder if the way things are packaged can be overkill. But this is one that one of my friends found online and bought a couple. I'm going to actually just pull it out of there for now. Oh, I don't have much roots. I don't know if this thing will survive. I left it in there too long, but look, it had a little flower. But look how tiny a pygmy sundew is compared to a typical sundew. So I'm going to actually plant that right there. And now I can plant this. So this is the natalensis. And it's nice because it had a huge flower spike. Okay, the whole thing is pulling out. I'm not going to separate them. I'm going to, you see how it's floating? It hasn't yet soaked up the water, so that's the thing about really, really dry peat moss. So this should weigh down and sink in there, so we'll find out. Yep, that's going to look nice. Do you see how it's like almost spongy, boggy? The peat moss is floating on the water because it hasn't yet fully absorbed. So now that I have that, I can go ahead with the Drosera madagascariensis, which is right over here. This is an interesting Drosera because it grows upright. However, I had it in here for quite some time because I never got around to planting it. That it will be interesting to see, to watch it as it grows upright. It's not going to sit easily with the fact that the peat moss is pretty dry. There we go. And then I have the unknown variety of spatulata. And look at all this live sphagnum moss, which will make a beautiful cover for it. I'm going to just plant that there. So I'm going to have a little gap there, but I can always plant another sundew, separate the two natalensis, but I'm also going to have the live sphagnum in here. And that's going to be a nice addition. So, see if any strands can be salvaged. Yep. Okay. And this is also distilled water and stuff. So I'm actually going to just see if I can use it in here. The, oops, without killing my plants. The reason why it looks gross is just because it's collected tannins and sediment, but it's fine, and this is already moist, so that's going to look good in there too. That, I'm not going to plant a paper towel. So now I have some more distilled water to add. And I'm going to just pour it down. No, I'm not going to pour it on the edge because it's puffing up and then going to get to the glass. So I'm going to pour it, oops, down the middle if I can. And I need to let it sit a little bit, but that's all there is to it. This flower stalk is spent, but it should eventually flower again. So here is how it looks. It looks a little bare, but as the sphagnum moss grows, it will fill it up, and as the sundews start to establish, I'll take cuttings and propagate. But they'll look nice once this terrarium gets established. So now I just wait until I see the peat moss having soaked up all the water that it can, and then I can add a little more as needed. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're inspired to start your own sundew open terrarium and tackle any gnat problem you may have once and for all in a natural way versus vinegar and soap. Anyway, thanks for watching, happy planting, and make sure you subscribe.